Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen. Sarah has put a link to this presentation in the chat. And let's see here. Actually, I think I might have done that in the wrong order. Hold on one second. I will go to presentation mode and then I will share. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Good. Okay.
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. So hi, my name is Karen Ward. I am the Director of Instructor Training for the Carpentries. I'll tell you a little bit more about who we are in just a moment. And there's a link to the slides in the chat if you'd like to follow along. I'll be talking to you today about the response that we've had to take, as many have. We have a successful in-person workshop model that we've now had to take to function online. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the story of how our community has led us through that process. So a little bit about who we are. We are a fiscally sponsored nonprofit worldwide. We maintain a curriculum of over 40 active lessons. These are collaboratively developed and community maintained. We also have a relatively new incubator and lab where we have over 30 lessons currently in development. And in addition to offering lessons that are openly available, we also teach people how to teach our lessons. So we have an instructor certification program that consists of a 2-day workshop, a lesson contribution to build our community of folks contributing to our lessons, a community discussion in which we support preparation to teach and reflection after hosting workshops, and a teaching demonstration in which we give people an opportunity to give and receive feedback on teaching before heading out to teach their first workshop. The kinds of workshops that we do fall under 3 different lesson programs, which I won't go into detail about. But software carpentry, data carpentry, and library carpentry are unified under the umbrella of novice level training. So we're focusing on people who are just beginning to develop technical skills. Generally a 2-day workshop format. This can be split up in a lot of different ways. And in fact, we've had folks who have taken our lessons and converted them into semester-long courses. But generally the size of the package is expected to be for about a 2-day workshop. Volunteer instructors who apply our teaching practices when they teach our lessons. And our goal is to address gaps in computational skills in researchers and research adjacent folks. We are a global organization. We are heavily represented in the United States and Europe. We also have burgeoning communities in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, and little upstarts throughout the world where instructors and instructor trainers have begun to take hold and create their own communities. So how our workshops work, our materials are open. Anyone can use our materials at any time. They're CC BY licensed. However, we do have a branded workshop program, and we do have guidelines for who can run our workshops and call them a Carpentries workshop. Anyone can self-organize a Carpentries workshop if they have at least one certified instructor. And we ask that they use our workshop website template and that they use our pre and post assessment tools to help them and to help us to understand how these workshops work and what works about them. And this can be done at no cost. We also have a centrally organized workshop program where our volunteers sign up with us when they want to teach workshops. And our workshop administrators and regional coordinators will connect those volunteer instructors with hosts and support the organizational work for their workshops. And there is a workshop fee associated with those centrally organized workshops. So the features, again, we have a 2-day workshop where we teach folks about the basics of pedagogy and how we want our workshops to run. But the basic features of these workshops are that we ask people to use what we call participatory live coding. So in most cases, they're learning a programming language or a technical tool of some kind. And in this case, the instructors are teaching slowly, explaining as they type. So while they perform the procedures, the learners are going along and doing it with them, actively participating in that workshop. We have an instructional team at all workshops. So we ask instructors never to teach alone. So there should always be at least one co-instructor and sometimes more. And that we ask that they have helpers in the room. And then in an in-person workshop, learners will use colored sticky notes, which they put on the computer if they need help or to signal that they've completed an exercise. And then the helpers can circulate around the room. They can easily see these sticky notes. They can respond to them. The instructors can ask them to put up sticky notes at various different points. And it's a quick way to read the room. Instructional team under these circumstances shares the work and shares their perspectives on problem solving. And we hear a lot from our instructors as well as from our helpers that everyone learns, and in a very real way. Volunteering as a Carpentries instructor is sort of our advanced training. We don't provide advanced workshops. We focus on the novice level, but this is a very real form of training as well. And all of our workshops, like this event, are held under a code of conduct. In the workshop itself, the instructional team and the hosts have that ability to collaborate and respond. And we also have a code of conduct committee that handles post-workshop reports. So this is a model that has been tried and true for us. It's been working really well. We've been building our organization around the world. People are excited about our workshops, and it is really hard to translate all of this, very social, very collaborative workshop environment into a tiny little screen. Identifying some of the challenges of this. Limited screen space is a big one. You just can't assume that folks have 5 different monitors. You have to design everything around a small laptop screen, and Zoom is crowding out even the basic coding windows that you would want to have open to do that live coding. Faces are often hidden. That makes it hard for our instructors to read the room and get a feel for who's listening and how it's going with them. There's no more sticky notes. No, you can put all you want on your computer and nobody's going to see it. Even raising a hand, there's like 5 different ways to do it. And I guarantee you, no matter how many times you tell folks how you want them to raise their hands, they're going to use all of them. Side conversations, our instructors talking with each other and learning from each other. All conversations now need a pathway. They can't just happen on the side. Helpers, we always advise that helpers not take over a learner's computer unless they absolutely have to, but there are some certain technical circumstances in which it's useful for a helper to be able to solve a problem by taking over a computer for a minute if there's a real snarl. Can't do that. So if you get stuck on an installation and really can't solve the problem, you can't solve the problem unless you can talk the learner through it. And even just the socialization, it doesn't just happen. You have to provide a channel for it. So for these and other reasons, before COVID-19, when community members had approached us about hosting workshops online, our recommendations were that we didn't suggest it. We weren't ready for it. Then COVID happened and all of a sudden, like it or not, this is what we were doing. And we were very lucky that our community basically came to the rescue. They really stepped up. So this is a screenshot from a conversation. Lex is one of our executive council members. Laura Accion is one of our fantastic trainers from Argentina. And Sarah Rono, who's here today, is our community development lead. And this is in March, and maybe we can put together a 10 quick tips for teaching online. And so Sarah put together a Google Doc and we started collecting ideas. And next thing you know, we had a blog post, and then we had another blog post. And then things kind of started to come together. So this is a very approximate timeline, but this is sort of the order in which things went. Starting with community blogging in March, we had those collaborative tips blog posts. We had people who were running workshops who suddenly had to convert them to being online, who already had them on the schedule, and they very kindly wrote a lengthy blog posts on how those workshops had gone. Our executive council put together a task force, including executive council members and core team members. We did a lot of listening to the community there, and put together a recommendations document, both for our internal and for our workshops responses. Once we had those initial recommendations together, again, this was really a community effort. So we put a recommendations document out there. Was like, these are all the things you need to think about. Go. And then we had to listen and see how it was going. And really, with all the challenges that were out there, we were quite afraid that this whole thing kind of might not work. So we were listening on Twitter, on Slack, on email. We have so many communications for this global community. We have our community discussion sessions. We have our learner surveys. We had created new surveys for our instructors, which was actually a cool thing to come out of this, to get their responses to teaching, and more blog posts as they came out. Processing all that information and listening to our community, we revised our recommendations in July, and we also started a short 3-hour bonus training module. So we have our 2-day workshop to prepare instructors. We don't have online teaching content there, but we now provide a 3-hour, a number of 3-hour sessions we've run so far to help our certified instructors prepare to teach online. I'll run you through a brief summary of what our recommendations have sort of included, and then I'll tell you how it's going. So overall, our recommendations, there are a lot of things that we could have done, semi-asynchronous formats, all kinds of, our community is a very technical community. So we heard about all kinds of different tools that folks are trying out there. Our recommendations, we decided really needed to stay as close to what we had started with as possible for a number of reasons, including just changing a global community in a whole new direction was probably not a good idea. So live synchronous sessions via video conferencing, minimalist, and demand for adoption of unfamiliar technology and as similar as possible to our in-person workshop. This is what we were going for. We added a new role to our instructional team. So there's so much to keep track of in an online workshop, again, with all these communications kind of needing their correct routes and not creating too much noise in one channel, but making sure that everything happens as it should. So we decided that instructors really should be able to focus on teaching. Helpers traditionally in these workshops have not played so much of a planning role. Usually they're folks that just kind of show up on the day of and then help. Maybe they get like a 10-minute like how to help kind of thing, but they don't necessarily plan the workshop. So particularly for new instructors who had never had the experience of preparing the content for a workshop, or perhaps even taught in a live classroom, we created a supporting instructor's role. So these folks can engage with the planning of the workshop and maybe even teach a small part of it, but they don't have that huge teaching role. And they can kind of get their feet wet in the workshop, as well as helping those primary instructors to manage the video conferencing environment, to watch the chat, to watch the communications, to step in if the instructor's connection fails, to manage muting and unmuting and breakout rooms and all that sort of thing. And so far, reports have been that people are grateful to have this sort of lightweight instructor experience as they begin. Our recommendations, again, suggest being very strategic with communications and thinking about where different kinds of communications should happen. And so this involves using the chat for the video conferencing. There's public and private options there. So the public chat should probably be used for hands and questions, but it's important not to let that get too noisy. And then you can use private and direct messaging for some basic messaging of helpers. You can create structures, you can label the helpers in the Zoom meeting. And that's one way that helpers can help. You can also use breakout rooms to provide help. Breakout rooms tend to slow down a workshop, and I'll talk about pacing in a little bit. And they're also nice for socialization. They really, really, really help to warm up that workshop. It's collaborative notes documents create a problem for screen space, but they are, when you have a notes document on the side, if someone does get disconnected or has other things going on in the background, it's really useful for them to have all the information they need in there to reconnect to the workshop, and they can look back at those notes and get caught up. And then having some way for the instructors and the helpers to coordinate together as they would perhaps in the back of the room of a workshop or out in the hallway. Having some way for that collaboration to occur among the team members. At all of our workshops, we heavily recommend formative assessment and feedback. Listening to your audience is a big part of what we teach. And this is more important than ever in an online teaching environment where you can't, again, see those faces and get that feel for the room. So these kinds of response tools that people have available include Zoom features, nonverbal feedback. You can have like the green check and the red X are kind of the closest thing we have to the sticky notes that they use in the classroom. So folks have kind of been using that in some of the same ways. And there's also polling apps, things like Google Forms can be useful for in-person and online teaching, but again, particularly important online. Having people respond to things in the chat, and then of course, creating formal surveys and deploying the ones that we have. And these tools can be used both to evaluate learning progress during a workshop as formative assessment, and also to solicit feedback on the workshop so that you have more confidence and more awareness with how the learner experience is going. Online workshops are more accessible in some ways. This is really exciting. We have people reporting that they're able to bring learners into their workshops that they haven't been able to reach before because they don't have that barrier of having to get to a physical space. On the other hand, it's less accessible in some other ways. Folks are having a really hard time with that full 2-day format now. So we're starting to recommend that they break it up over more days to help make it easier for people to juggle their lives in the background. Again, focusing on screen space and making sure that people are mindful of that small screen and not recommending that their learners do things assuming that they have a bunch of monitors that they can move things around, and being mindful of switching windows and things like that. And we have prepared cloud-based programming environments so that if they do run into a really intractable software problem and they can't support the learner in using their own machine during a workshop, they have another tool that they can use to be sure that everyone can participate in some way. And then finally, there's the challenge of internet. Many of our communities do have internet as sort of a safe assumption because we're working with researchers, but many of our communities around the world do not have such reliable access to the internet. And this is something that we've struggled with as a global organization that is just inherently dependent on the internet. All of our meetings occur online. But we have seen some of our communities really come through on this. And in particular, our regional coordinator in South Africa helped to convert funds that they had gotten a grant that was supposed to support travel for learners to get to an in-person workshop. And they were able to convert that into support for internet hotspots to allow those workshops to occur online. And that was a really neat thing to see. And then for participants with available but unreliable internet, we have cautiously suggested recording. Recording has some privacy issues, particularly when we have instructors who want to encourage people to keep their cameras on. That's kind of inconsistent with recording. So that's a tough one. But that's been an issue. So far, it's going well. We've had positive feedback. Our instructor feedback has been positive. And our communities, again, have liked engaging with learners that they haven't been able to connect with before. We've also had challenges. These workshops move more slowly. We haven't had quite as many instructors signing up to teach. And it does seem like the format is a little bit less resilient in variation to instructional approach. We've gotten a few complaints, which is not normally something that happens for us. So we're trying to explore that, but overall things still do seem to be going almost surprisingly well, given how challenging this transition has been. And then moving forward, our next recommendations update will include a little more prescriptive structure to try and help support more variation in instructor approach. We want to provide more support for those instructors to network and socialize in ways that aren't necessarily happening in the workshops now. We're going to expand the offerings of our 3-hour bonus modules and our technical curricula, given that these workshops are moving more slowly and kind of seem to be proceeding in slightly different ways, may need to adapt as well. So I think I'm at time here. I'd like to invite you, in addition to myself, I've brought you the lens of instructor training. We also have Sarah Rono and Carrie Jordan here today, who I know would be very happy to help address questions here. And I'd like to encourage you to check out Sarah's lightning talk, which talks a little bit more about our instructor training program. So I'd be happy to take questions. Well, if we don't have questions, I would like to thank you. Oh, I see a question. Whether we will continue to do more remote lessons and work in that medium, even if COVID is not a concern anymore. This is a big, big question for us. We've tentatively committed to, we've gone from our pilot phase to our semi-permanent workshop phase. So we are committed to the next year. I think it is very likely, again, given the enthusiasm of many of our community members to continuing to have an option to be able to do this. I think it is likely that it will continue to be an option. But we're not sure yet how we're going to balance that, because so far we do still feel like our in-person workshops are better. Students taking the workshops, that's an interesting one. We don't actually track our workshop attendees so much. We keep very close track of our instructors and our instructor participation, but it's kind of on the hosting organizations to track their learners. I would say anecdotally, we have been hearing more about no-show problems out there in online world, people signing up and then not coming. Optimally, the workshop size is actually smaller, so it's sometimes not a terrible thing when people don't show up, because it makes the workshop easier to run. But that's a good question. I don't know. Generally Carpentries workshops are heavily oversubscribed, so I would say that actually one of the concerns that I've had is that instructors have been opening it up to a much larger audience than our recommendations suggest. So that's sort of the other problem.
All right, so we are at the end of our session, and thank you very much. I actually did not know that much about carpentry, so it was really nice to kind of get some more context. And if you want to stay around for an extra 15 minutes, we do keep the room open if you want to chat or ask further questions or anything like that. But I will be stopping the recording now.